Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and talk about none other than the Samsung Galaxy S3 and see pretty much how this phone holds up in 2021. Now I really don't think anybody should be buying this phone in this day and age, so I'll find probably the cheapest other phones that I would recommend this year. I'll leave them linked down in the description below. You can also go to cheapphones.co, which is my website, best website in the world. You can help support the channel those ways. So without further ado, let's talk about the Galaxy S3. Now this device did come out in 2012, so it really isn't the latest and greatest device. I'm pretty sure everyone knows that, but it isn't like this device is super archaic in some hardware features that it has. And what's super surprising about it is that there's still some areas about this phone that I really wish were still here on some of the latest and greatest phones that we have in 2021. Now this device on the front has that 4.8-inch Super AMOLED display, and it's a 720p panel. And what's so funny about this screen is that it's still actually not even that bad of a display, first of all, but second of all, I remember this phone vividly when it first came out. And what's so crazy about this phone was that panel size was actually pretty big at that time. It wasn't like it was a super small panel. This was actually a pretty good sized panel, and it was considered kind of a bigger phone. I mean, in this day and age in 2012, really the biggest phone that we had at the time was something like an iPhone 5 or iPhone 4S, depending on when this phone came out, which was kind of early in the year. So it was the iPhone 4S and the Galaxy S3 at the same time. And that is a pretty astonishing difference between the two in terms of a size. So this phone was a massive sized panel, everything on it, and it didn't even have that much bezel compared to a lot of other manufacturers at the time. So that's another pretty big asset of this specific device. You had the front camera with the Samsung logo, you had the home button on the front with the capacitive keys on the side, and for sure this was a really good feeling phone. And at that time, and even though it was mostly built out of plastic, I definitely don't think the front is that ugly of a thing for sure. Now you have the micro USB port on the bottom, and you also have the headphone jack on this device as well. And this device is actually a pretty thin device for being as old as it is. I remember a lot of these phones at this point were still pretty thick. They had a lot of, bezel and a lot of this. This device really didn't even look that bad, which was really surprising. Now on the back, you do have that removable back, which is beautiful. You could go ahead and replace this back if you want to very easily. You could also expand the storage with that micro SD card slot, which again, as I stated before, is a humongous asset for it. Having that type of capability is extremely cool, and I just love having that type of capability of just putting more memory in if you need to. And you also have that removable battery, which is beautiful. You can go ahead and put a bigger battery inside of it if you want to. You can go ahead and do all sorts of different things with this type of, specific hardware, and I love that. Having those type of battery cases and all that crazy stuff was just super cool, and I really wish this is one of those areas. The headphone jack, the removable battery, and the micro SD card slot. Those are areas that I really do wish more manufacturers would end up bringing back. It doesn't look like anybody's going to bring them back anymore, but that is seriously one area that I really do miss about these phones. Now you also have that single camera setup on the back, which we'll go ahead and hit on right now. So like I said, single camera, it had that 8 megapixel sensor, and there's really not a crazy amount of things that are great with it now. It's a single 8 megapixel sensor, no ultra wide, no telephoto lens, only 1080p. But what I can tell you about this specific, camera is that it's actually not even that bad of a camera when you really think about it. I think this phone probably had the best camera of that year, and let alone of the video resolutions and the single sensor and stuff, the camera isn't even that bad. I mean, I remember using this phone around that 2013, 2014 era, and it was around that time I had an Nexus 4, and this phone, I think, did have the best camera of that time. It was a very good camera. You had a ton of features. I don't know how Samsung puts these many features in a type of a device that's in this type of age, and it's crazy what Samsung was able to do, and I have a lot of respect and I have a lot of all that stuff for them. And this camera, even though I would not recommend anybody using it in this day and age, is still pretty crazy what Samsung was able to do. Now you also had that 1.9 megapixel front facing camera, and it's a 720p lens, and again, I mean, take it as you will, I probably wouldn't recommend anybody using this type of camera, but I think it's a really cool thing that Samsung was able to do. They put a solid back camera and they put a solid front camera on this type of device, and I think at the end of the day, having that type of capability for these type of lenses is seriously extremely important, and I think that in and of itself is a pretty big asset for the Samsung Galaxy S3. Even though I wouldn't recommend anybody using this type of phone anymore, I think it's pretty cool at the end of the day. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up. Now let's go and hit on probably one of the weirder aspects of this device. So the software, I mean, it officially started off with Android 4.0.4. It eventually got up to Android 4.3. And this is one of those areas I probably wouldn't recommend anybody using this phone anymore either. But it is pretty funny that this device is still getting custom ROM support in some areas. I did have a Galaxy S3 at one point that I didn't use as a main device, but I did custom ROM and I resold for more money. And it was insane of the process. I mean, it was so easy back then. You can just go ahead and root this thing. I had the Verizon model and I also bought another T-Mobile model. I think it was like another model. And that thing was very surprisingly just so easy to root at that time. I just had to go into Odin and flash some stuff and it was, rooted. And then I had a custom ROM and install custom firmware or whatever, or custom the flash model, whatever, I forget the thing. And I had to install custom recovery and all that stuff. And I was able to root it and I was able to custom ROM it. And that really did breathe a new life into this type of phone. And I am curious to see what type of newer custom ROMs are out for this thing. I mean, it's super insane. I mean, I would not recommend anybody to actually use this phone as pretty much a, daily device for, in stock software or even custom ROM, but the fact that you have that capability is pretty insane. Now this thing also did have a pretty good sized battery at that time. It was a 2100 mAh battery, which is pretty small in this day and age, but it was pretty big at the time. And again, this is another one of those areas, the fact that it had a removable battery just breathes so much more life into it. And it's one of those areas that I really do love about this device. So in terms of that covers up, I guess, something good about this phone. It's probably one of the better aspects of it for sure. Now ending it off with the performance, this device does have a quad-core CPU, which is great, the Exynos 4412 chipset, and 1 gigabyte of RAM on every single model of this device. And there are, I think, 3 different models of this phone. And I mean, this is what I'll tell you. I really don't think this phone is a good performing phone anymore. But as I said before, when this phone first came out and probably the first couple years of it being out, this was probably a really good performing phone. And I used this phone for a little bit of time. I didn't use it for like a daily phone, but I was envious of a lot of things about this device when I had the Nexus 4. And I think the performance was one of them. Like the smoothest factor for sure was for the Nexus 4. And I think the performance was better on the Nexus 4, but I don't remember a lot of people complaining about the performance of the Galaxy S3. I still think the software is one of the biggest problems of the S3. I think when you ROM it and you actually go ahead and get some smoothness factor to it, I think it does kind of even out a lot of the problems that you would have had. And I think, like I said before, one of the biggest problems with this phone was the fact that it really wasn't that great of a software. Forget the longevity or whatever. I mean, it was just so bad. It was just like glitchiness all over the place. There were just so many things running around. It was just so themed and so skinned. I'm so glad they switched to One UI and it's a little bit of an improvement, but I don't know what they were doing with TouchWiz. So I feel like the performance in this day and age isn't good, but for that time, I think it was okay, but I think it was still behind things like the Nexus phones of that year and probably even the iPhones. But I am glad that this phone came out. I'm glad that it got the performance and everything that it did, but I think it was really kind of succumbed to its software. I think that's probably the best way to put it. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it up. Now to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you go and pick up a Samsung Galaxy S3 in 2021? Well, this is what I'll tell you. No, I would not recommend buying a Galaxy S3 in 2021. There's really no huge reason to pick it up, but there are some assets where I actually really do like this phone. I mean, first of all, the screen is still actually pretty good. You do have some bezel around it and it's only 720p, but I do think the screen is in a bad area. Like I think for that time, if we're being this old, the fact that it's OLED, I think that's a pretty big asset for sure. You have the home button on the front, which is great, micro USB, as well as a headphone jack. Those are some pretty big I/O that we still don't have on a lot of devices. I mean, I like USB-C, but the headphone jack is something I really do miss. You have a removable back on this device with expandable storage, which is huge, as well as a removable battery. Then those are things that people really relatively increase or just go to the next phone of in this day and age. They want to get either a bigger battery or better battery life, or they want to get more storage. And you can do that easily on this phone without having to do anything crazy. You have an okay back camera. It's like really, really, really okay. It's not that great, but again, for this day and age, I think it's okay. An okay front-facing camera as well. And I think those are some pretty big things. And I think you can custom ROM this thing, which is another pretty big W in it. But I think other than that, I don't think anybody's really gonna go and buy this phone anymore. So take it as you will. But I would probably recommend the lowest I would go in a Galaxy is like a Galaxy S8 or Galaxy S9. I would not recommend going anywhere lower than that. But on top of that, I probably would stick with something like the original Google Pixel. That's the type of device that that's like the lowest I would go. It still has a lot of capabilities. It's not that old in software. You can easily go in custom ramen and pretty much move on from there. So as stated before, those phones will be linked down below, or you can get them from cheapphones.co. You can get wallpapers and all that good stuff from that specific webpage as well. You can help support the channel at the same time. So that's really pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.